In the year 1198, Pope Innocent III, determined to reclaim Jerusalem for Christian rule, issued a solemn call for a new crusade. His words echoed across Europe, and by 1200, Count Louis of Blois and many French nobles had taken the cross. Soon after, the illustrious Count Baldwin IX of Flanders pledged himself to the holy cause, joined by Boniface of Montferrat, who would take a leading role. Quick pause. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. It's always fascinating to see how far across the world these stories of history are reaching. Rather than marching blindly into the Holy Land, these lords adopted the strategy once championed by Richard the Lionheart to first strike Egypt, the beating heart of Muslim power, as the surest way to secure Jerusalem. To carry out such an ambitious plan, envoys were dispatched to Venice to negotiate with the formidable Doge Enrico Dandolo. There, they contracted the Venetian fleet to provide ships capable of carrying an estimated force of 26,500 men. Venice threw itself entirely into the project. All other trade and commerce halted while Venetian craftsmen labored day and night to construct the promised fleet of 50 massive ships. But there was a problem. Unlike earlier crusades, no king commanded this venture. Without royal pressure, many knights felt no obligation to gather at Venice. Instead, they departed from other ports. When the time came to sail, only about 12,000 men had actually assembled, less than half the expected force. This left the Crusades' leaders in a dire predicament. They suddenly had far more ships than soldiers and, worse still, no money to pay for the fleet they had contracted. Enrico Dandolo, shrewd as ever, offered a solution. If the Crusaders would help Venice reclaim the coastal city of Zara, a Christian city, though once Venetian and now independent, their debt would be forgiven. The proposal horrified many. To attack fellow Christians was to stain their vows, but Louis, Baldwin, and Boniface allowed themselves to be persuaded. Reluctantly, the army agreed, yet not all followed. Voices like Simon of Montfort thundered with outrage, declaring this a betrayal of their sacred cause. Despite the protests, the siege of Zara went forward. After a week of fighting, the city fell and was returned to Venetian hands. Word soon reached Rome. When Pope Innocent III heard that his crusade had turned its swords against fellow Christians, he was furious. He excommunicated the entire crusading host. Stunned, the French lords sent envoys pleading for forgiveness. Innocent, unwilling to see the holy war destroyed outright, lifted the excommunication from the French, though he kept his condemnation firmly upon the Venetians. But even this papal rebuke was hidden from many crusaders. Boniface of Montferrat intercepted the Pope's letter, concealing the sting of Innocent's wrath. While the army still lingered at Zara, a new and unexpected proposal arrived. Envoys of Alexius Angelus, the son of the deposed Byzantine Emperor Isaac II, approached the Crusader leaders. Alexius, they claimed, was the rightful ruler of Constantinople, unjustly cast aside by his usurping uncle who had blinded and imprisoned his father. Alexius promised the Crusaders riches beyond measure if they would restore him to his throne. The Byzantine army would join their ranks, the empire's treasury would fund their war, and the power of Constantinople itself would be bent toward the conquest of Egypt and Jerusalem. The offer was dazzling. The thought of Byzantine gold and soldiers at their side tempted the Crusades' leaders. Yet again, dissent tore through the ranks. Simon of Montfort raged against this diversion, and many ordinary crusaders longed simply to march against the Muslims. But the great lords, Baldwin, Louis, and Boniface, signed a treaty with Alexius. Those who could not stomach the bargain, including Simon himself, abandoned the crusade entirely and set off for the Holy Land by their own paths. When word of the deal reached Pope Innocent, he forbade the Crusaders from turning their swords against Byzantium. Once again, his warnings were concealed from the common soldiers. The crusading fleet set sail for Constantinople. There, outside the mighty walls, Boniface and the Doge paraded Prince Alexius aboard a Venetian galley, calling out to the citizens that they had come only to restore their rightful ruler. But the people of Constantinople did not respond with cheers. From the ramparts came jeers, curses, and even flights of arrows. Whatever Alexius had promised, it was clear that his cause was not embraced by the citizens he hoped to rule. The Crusaders now faced an impossible dilemma. Their army had already been weakened by dissent and desertion. To retreat would mean the Crusades' collapse. To advance meant the unthinkable, to attack Constantinople itself. Yet in July 1203, against all odds, they launched their assault. By August 1st, after brutal fighting, the unthinkable became reality. The Crusaders breached the walls, seized the city, and enthroned Alexius as Emperor Alexius IV. But victory brought no peace. Anti-Latin hostility boiled within Constantinople, and the young emperor never truly controlled his throne. The crusade had been diverted, corrupted, and forever changed. What had begun as a holy mission to reclaim Jerusalem had instead plunged Europe's greatest Christian army into the heart of Byzantium, with consequences that would echo for centuries. Alexius IV's promises to the Crusaders had come to nothing. The funds never arrived, the soldiers he had pledged never materialized, and outside the gates of Constantinople the crusading army grew restless. Within the city, resentment toward the Latin presence festered. It was then that a powerful Greek nobleman named Murtzuphlus, clever, ambitious, and ruthless, rallied an anti-Latin faction. In a swift coup, he seized control of the capital. Alexius IV was strangled in a dark chamber, his short reign cut off with brutal finality. Murtzuphlus declared himself emperor, shut the mighty gates of Constantinople, and turned the city against the Crusaders camped outside its walls. This betrayal ignited fury in the Crusader ranks. They had endured hunger, debt, and excommunication, and now they had been denied the very prize promised to them. In April of 1204, the Crusaders resolved upon the unthinkable. They would storm the greatest Christian city in the East. The siege began, and after only a few days of brutal fighting, the unassailable walls of Constantinople were breached. The Crusaders poured in. Murtzuphlus was seized and swiftly executed, his brief reign ending in disgrace. The city's clergy fell at the feet of the Crusades' leaders, begging for mercy upon the holy capital of Eastern Christendom. But mercy was not granted. What followed was 3 days of horror. Constantinople, the jewel of Byzantium, seat of emperors, and treasure house of Christendom, was left at the mercy of men drunk with vengeance and greed. Gold and relics were looted, ancient churches defiled, and the city's inhabitants subjected to violence and humiliation. The sack of Constantinople sent shockwaves throughout the Christian world. Knights like Simon of Montfort, who had long warned that this crusade had betrayed its sacred vows, now seemed tragically vindicated. Pope Innocent III himself was appalled. He issued a blistering condemnation, excommunicating the Crusaders and denouncing their crimes in the strongest possible terms. Today, the Fourth Crusade remains one of the most disturbing and bewildering episodes in the history of the crusading movement. How, people ask, did an army sworn to reclaim Jerusalem end up plundering Christian cities and toppling Constantinople? Some argue that greed drove the entire enterprise, that from the very start, the Crusaders had plotted to seize Byzantium's wealth and never truly intended to fight in Egypt. But modern historians push back on this claim. As Christopher Tyerman, one of the leading voices on the Crusades, insists, there is no convincing evidence that the Crusaders plotted the violent overthrow of the Byzantine system until they were presented with no viable alternative in 1204. In other words, the Crusaders did not march east dreaming of Byzantium's fall. They had intended to ally with Alexius IV to secure his throne and then wage holy war in Egypt. Only when Alexius was murdered and Murtzuphlus barred them from the city did they turn against Constantinople. The politics behind the Fourth Crusade were messy and deeply Byzantine, quite literally. As historian Jonathan Phillips explains, the reason the Crusaders turned toward Constantinople at all in 1203 was the invitation of Alexius himself, who appealed to them to restore him and his father to power. Without his plea, The great host would never have sailed to the Bosporus. And yet, once they did seize the city the second time, they chose to sack it mercilessly. Why? The answer lies partly in decades of growing tension between East and West. The Byzantines had resisted the Third Crusade, and memories of the infamous massacre of the Latins in 1182, when every Catholic in Constantinople was slaughtered, still haunted Western nights. Mercy had withered long before the walls fell. Had the Crusaders shown restraint in 1204, had they treated the city and its people with dignity, the Fourth Crusade might be remembered as a tragic detour rather than a catastrophe. Instead, it is remembered for betrayal, brutality, and the shattering of Christian unity. It's often said that the Fourth Crusade caused the fall of Byzantium, but that's not the full truth. By the time the Crusaders reached its gates, the empire was already crumbling from within. Corruption, infighting, and weakness had hollowed it out long before a single Latin soldier set foot on its walls. The fact that Constantinople fell at all is less a story of Crusader strength, and more a damning testament to Byzantine fragility. The real blame lies with the Angeli dynasty. Their incompetence, reckless feuds, and short-sighted rule practically invited disaster. They turned an empire once feared across the world into a house of cards, and the Crusaders simply gave it the final push. The sack of Constantinople wasn't the cause of Byzantium's collapse. It was the mirror reflecting its decay. And that's why the Fourth Crusade still chills historians today. It was a holy war turned inward, a Christian army tearing apart a Christian empire. Proof that greed, ambition, and betrayal can twist even the most sacred vows into weapons of ruin. So let me ask you, what do you think? Was the sack of Constantinople the final nail in the coffin? Or was the empire already doomed to fall no matter what? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. Before you go, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Vassal Truths. We uncover the raw, unsettling truths behind history's greatest legends. Stay curious, because the past still has lessons we've barely begun to learn.